Hello everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Nadine El-Hanafi, and today I will be talking about food selectivity in children with autism. This webinar is the first in Brightbot's Autism webinar series, and I would ask you guys to join the Autism Community Support Group at brightbot.com, which is totally free, and it's important for awareness because the bigger we make our community, the more likely that people will be able to get the help that they need. So I just want to let you guys know that during the presentation, which will last about 20 minutes, we will be muting everyone. And the reason we're doing that is to eliminate the outside noise. So now I will begin talking about food selectivity. But before we can talk about that, we have to talk about what autism is because it pretty much occurs in this population, so you have to know about the disorder. So what is autism? Autism is a developmental neurological disorder that is characterized by several characteristics such as compulsive repetitive behaviors and interests, difficulty with eye contact and facial expressions, underdeveloped social interaction, and difficulty with verbal and nonverbal communication. And it is important to note that autism is a spectrum disorder, so that means that no two people with autism are the same. They may have certain common characteristics, but none of them are the same. They can be either low functioning or high functioning or somewhere in between. So if you just meet someone with autism, that isn't a representation of every person with autism. And just to put things in perspective, 1 in 68 children in the United States has autism. So now we'll talk about food selectivity. What is food selectivity? Now, many of you might have your own children or have relatives that say, my child is a picky eater, which is completely normal for most kids because nearly a fourth of all young children have eating issues, but this normally gets fixed as they grow older, but it's not usually the case for children who have autism. So food selectivity includes food refusal, the limited amount or type of accepted foods, and high-frequency single food intake. And it was found in a study that 60% of parents interviewed said that their children with autism had strong food preferences, which is a big number because that means that this problem can have serious implications for their health because they're not getting the adequate nutritional intake that they should be. Next, we'll talk about the causes. And at the moment, there is no exact pinpointed cause for food selectivity in this population. The research varies a lot. I actually did a research paper on this past semester, and I found several theories, but I wasn't able to find an exact answer. So it could be caused, 1, by several medical factors children with autism have that are linked to feeding issues, such as gastrointestinal difficulties, so diarrhea, recurrent vomiting, and food allergies. Another cause is possibly it can have to do with the biochemical processes in the body. And normally we have all these processes in our body, our systems work together to make sure that we can function efficiently. But researchers believe that children with autism have enzyme deficiencies. These particular enzymes that they don't have are the ones that are needed to break down 2 proteins known as gluten and casein. And because they're unable to break down these 2 proteins, it is believed that the body creates amino acids that have an addictive nature, much like opioids, so kind of like drugs. And these opioids have the ability to invade the intestinal walls, bloodstreams, and potentially cross the blood-brain barrier, which can interrupt central nervous system function. And once something like that can get into the brain, it can really affect a person's behavior, which is why they believe that this enzyme deficiency and the addictive qualities of those amino acids can lead to an increase in appetite for certain foods that are high in gluten and casein proteins because they pretty much can't control it. They're kind of addicted to those kind of foods. That's one theory. And then another possible implication of this enzyme deficiency is that the lack of enzymes that break down the 2 proteins can lead to food sensitivity and limited food choices because of the negative sensation they feel when consuming certain foods that probably don't have those 2 proteins. And then, another possible cause is, it's very common, most people know that children with autism have different sensory processing abilities than typically developing children, and that is they do not process sensory information in the same way, which can get in the way of feeding development. Because if you think about it, a meal is really a complex sensory experience. If you think about when you're sitting at the table, you take in the way the food looks, the way it smells, the textures, the tastes, and in addition to the presence of other people and the conversation they're having around them, this is a lot to take in, sensory information. So if for a child with autism, that can be extremely overwhelming input, and it's believed that they can't control their preference for certain foods because of how they process the sensory information from the feeding experience. So they're basically thinking that it could probably be something sensory, that all the sensory information is too much for them and they don't know how to handle it. And another theory is that children with autism often show a lot of behavioral deficits, as previously mentioned, such as communication issues. So they may not be able to have the ability to talk or to express what they want or need, such as hunger, if they're full, what foods they like and what they dislike. A lot of that can get in the way of how they communicate with their parents about what kind of foods they want to eat. And another possibility is rigid and repetitive behavior, which is often found in children with autism as well, as previously mentioned, which can lead to restrictions on foods consumed because of the preference for sameness. So I've had parents tell me that their child will only eat things that are blue or things that are a certain color, or they'll be fixated on a certain kind of food and they won't want to eat anything else. And if they try to give them a different kind of food, they just won't accept it, or they'll kind of just like throw a tantrum until they get the food that they want and that they're used to. And another possible behavioral deficit is because children with autism have social interaction issues, they may lack the appropriate social exchanges with peers that would allow them to copy proper mealtime behavior, such as use of utensils and self-feeding skills. These are all things that you learn from watching others around you, and so they may not be able to have that kind of social interaction that would allow them to pick up on these proper feeding behaviors. See, all of these factors can potentially lead to a difficult time maintaining a nutritionally adequate diet because they're not learning proper feeding development. And now, to go into the treatment options for food selectivity, I found that not a lot of research has been done on this, and I found two different types of treatment programs. One of them is more so research has been done and it's been found that it works, but not to my knowledge, it hasn't really been practiced with children a lot. And the first one we'll talk about is behavior therapy. So the study that I found, it conducted research on 46 children for 47 days, and it consisted of behavior therapy for 3 hours a day and oral motor therapy 1 hour a day, 7 days a week, to improve feeding behaviors. That sounds intense because it really is intense, but it turned out that feeding behaviors did improve in these children, and which is the first step with this approach, because then they can learn how to use it on other children with autism. And so basically the oral and motor therapy is administered by a speech therapist and an occupational therapist. And the team also includes a gastroenterologist, pediatrician, nurse, and nutritionist. So it uses a comprehensive approach so the child can learn how to model appropriate mealtime behavior while building necessary skills for feeding. And it is believed that the children benefit from the rule-based nature, structure, and consistent application of behavior principles in treatment. So it basically supports ABA, which is applied behavior analysis, that is commonly used as a treatment intervention for children with autism. So it exposes them to this repetitive behavior therapy, and it's supposed to increase a good behavior that they want, which is, in this case, is feeding. Now, the second approach is a little bit different. It's called the Sequential Oral Sensory Feeding Program, also known as the SOS feeding program. And the goal is to also increase the child's food repertoire and food intake. But in this case, it's not really as rigorous. It's more of a play-based intervention that incorporates sensory, motor, oral motor, behavioral, learning, medical, and nutritional factors. And the team here includes pediatric psychologists, speech pathologists, and occupational therapists. So the whole point of this program is to basically teach the child that food is not such a bad thing, and to encourage them to explore new foods and to be open to different kinds of textures and tastes. And the good thing about it is that the child is in control of their interactions with the food throughout the whole therapy session. If they feel like they're not comfortable with the progress they're making towards eating a specific kind of food, they're able to go back to a level of comfort that did not put them in distress. And it is believed that allowing the child to be in control of these food interactions allows them to move through the steps to eating hierarchy, which is basically the 6 steps in the sequential process of learning to eat, which are visual tolerance, interaction, smell, touch, taste, and eating. You don't think about it, but all of this is really involved in eating. Eating actually includes a lot of steps, and this program aims to teach the children all of these steps so that they can increase their food intake and be mindful, be open-minded to new kinds of foods. So again, it encourages the child to explore different foods and interact with new foods and basically have a positive eating attitude towards the eating experience that will not only carry over in therapy, but also in their everyday lives. Now, this past summer, I had the opportunity as an intern at a school that is specialized for children with autism, and I actually observed the SOS feeding program, and it was an incredible experience. I noticed much of what I just described to you. They don't even call it the SOS feeding program, they call it food school, and every day around the end of the day, the speech therapist, well, not every day, I think it's like twice a week they do it there in the school, but they would take the kids at the end of the day and they would just say, oh, it's time for food school. And they would, before they start, they would blow bubbles and just get the kids feeling like they're kind of playing a game. And then you would have like different food groups, like you'd have turkey, veggie sticks, foods with different textures like cheese sticks, oranges cut up into pieces, apples. And the goal would be to allow the child to interact with the food. And they would start by, it wouldn't go immediately to putting the food in your mouth because they build up to that level. So they say, it sounds silly, but they would give the child, if they're starting with a slice of turkey, they would say, oh, can you put it on top of your head? So they'd put it on top of their head. And then next it would be like, can you make it touch your forehead? And then your nose. And then they move down slowly, like to the mouth. But they say, oh, can you kiss the piece of turkey? Or can you take a little bite? Or can you lick it? And it's actually several steps before they get to the point of actually eating the food. So it gets them more comfortable with the feeding experience. And again, I noticed that if the child would like gag just because of the texture of the food, or as soon as they put it in their mouth, the speech therapist would be like, it's okay, you can spit it out, and they would be able to like go back to a level of comfort with the food so that they're not in distress and they don't, they're not really like traumatized by the whole experience. They're not being forced to do something that they don't want to do. It allows them to have more control over the whole experience in general. And it was a pretty interesting experience. So just to finish off, I would like to just make it known that food selectivity remains very underexplored, because I feel like in my research that I've done this past semester, it was hard to find a lot of literature on this issue. Again, there's no definitive cause, and there are currently 2 possible treatment options: the behavior-based treatment and the play-based treatment programs. And I think it's good that there are potentially 2 different options, because children with autism are very different from one another. So maybe one option might work for one child and one might not. So it's always good to have more options, but I believe that more research is needed to further assess the problem, given its prevalence and the effect that it has on the health of these children. And that concludes my presentation. We will unmute you guys now and take questions, but before I take questions from you guys, I would like to know, I'm interested to know if you knew about this problem in children who have autism before today. And do you or someone you know have a child that displays food selectivity, and what is it like for them?
Question: with autism, does the child throw temper tantrums?
Yes, often children with autism will have meltdowns, but it's usually because they might be taking in too much sensory information that they don't know how to handle, as I mentioned, and they might not be able to convey their feelings with words. So usually if they're having a meltdown, it's usually that's their way of communicating with you and telling you that something is wrong, or because they can't verbally communicate it.
The reason I asked that question, last year I was on a cruise and I noticed a child, I think she had autism, and she wanted some bacon. It was a breakfast, and her parents would not allow her to have it. I don't know if it caused a reaction or what when she eats bacon, but her mother, father, and an uncle, and this was a young child, had to restrain her because she was just running and screaming. I don't know if that has anything to do with autism.
I mean, it could be. If she did have autism, that might be something that's common. I mean, I've observed children with autism, and I've seen that if they do, like, yeah, if they don't like the way something is going, or if they might not be getting something that they want, maybe because maybe their parents had good reason to not give them the piece of bacon. Maybe they know they might be allergic to it, but they want it anyway. It could be a lot of different things, but that might be it. But not every child has autism if they throw a tantrum.
Okay.
Once, question to you, Nadine. Once you have autism, is it reversible, or once you have it, that's it?
No, it's not. It's actually not reversible, but it's a neurological disorder, which means that it's something that's in the brain, and most neurological disorders don't really have a cure to them, but if they're caught early on and get early intervention, it really helps make the characteristics, I guess, less severe. It's always important to get an early diagnosis and treatment, but even though it's not curable, but definitely early intervention does help a lot.
Okay. Why? Because I do have a nephew that is autistic, and his parents, they had to get a lot of treatment for him, but how they found out was through testing his hair, because no matter what doctor they took him to or specialist, no one could figure out what was wrong with him.
Mm-hmm.
And because he wasn't born like that, but he got lead poisoning, and that brought it on. And I find that they had to change up his diet completely. He's mostly on a plant-based diet, and they have to, look at the way he behaves and reacts and stuff like that. But I find that repetition has a lot to do with it, and the way he functions, he can read and everything. And if you tell him, say for instance, December 10th, 2097, he'll tell you, okay, it's a Wednesday,
Yeah.
So that's kind of amazing to all of us. But, he's such a loving child, though, so he really is my heart,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that's why I was asking that question.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that he wasn't born with it, and it happens, well, I don't know how often it happens, but some children will be developing, I guess, typically, and then they will regress, and then it turns out that they'll have autism. And I know you mentioned that that he'll be able to tell you, like, you give him a date and he'll say it's a Wednesday. And a lot of children with autism have these amazing abilities. Like, I was volunteering at an event for the American Autism Association. It was a soccer event, and there was this little girl, and you would tell her a date, and then she wouldn't even look at it, and you would tell her like maybe 10 dates, like each one after the other, and then she'd be able to tell you the date, like whatever date it was, she would memorize it. I found it so cool. But yeah, they're amazing children, and they're
it is amazing to me, the way that he can just tell you these things.
Yeah.
Nadine, I have a question.
Sure.
Yes. You know, I've always heard the terminology that that a child can be a functioning autistic child. What does that mean?
Functioning,
Hmm.
there's a difference between low functioning and high functioning. I don't know if you hear those terms a lot,
Hmm.
but I guess
Yeah.
it just means it's talking about their abilities, I guess intellectually and physically as well. So that can be what that's referring to. But what context have you heard it in?
They'll say something. I guess you know it was high functioning. What is? I don't know what
High
that means.
functioning. Okay, so maybe they might have autism, but they might not be that. You might not be able to tell because a lot when you look at children who have autism, you can't really tell what they have. It's not one of those physical disabilities. But a child with autism, just because they have autism, does again it goes back to it being a spectrum disorder. So that means you can be on. I mean, it's not like literally. You know, you can pinpoint what is what on the spectrum, but you can have a child who may not have like I guess a lot of intellectual ability, and then you can have a child who does have a lot like more intellectual ability, but they might still have the other characteristics of autism, such as the impairment in social interactions or the lack of eye contact. You'll notice that a lot. Like that's a big thing with children with autism. So a child can have autism and then they might not be that affected intellectually, but they just have the other characteristics that do put them on the autism spectrum. Like people with Asperger's, it's also on the autism spectrum. So those kind of people, they're very intelligent, but they're still lacking in that social piece. And so you might be talking to them and they'll be saying things, but you know it might not really like connect together, you know. So that's what they probably mean by high functioning versus low functioning.
So a child that's high functioning, would a parent know that that child has autism?
It's again, a parent can't really make that diagnosis.
Right.
If a parent is like noticing the symptoms of autism, they would go to their pediatrician, and then they would have to go to a psychologist to make that diagnosis.
Okay.
I have a question. If a child with autism is likely to have tantrums, how do you know that the tantrum is related to food selectivity? How do you know it's not related to something other than food selectivity?
Well, it depends on the situation. I mean, if they're in a feeding, I mean, food selectivity isn't, they can throw a tantrum because they don't like the food that they're being given. And you'd probably notice it in the situation. And I've seen like children, they don't really, from the children I've observed, you don't really see them throwing a tantrum, but like this one child, he put like a slice of an orange in his mouth and he immediately started gagging. You know, you'll just notice these things, or like they'll make like, it's just like kind of like, I don't want to say like any other child, but you notice when a child makes like a scrunched up face when they're young and they don't like a specific kind of food. So that's kind of the behavior that I've observed. I can't really speak for every child, but I've noticed that they'll make faces or like they'll gag, or they'll just say like they don't want to like, or they'll just close their mouth if someone's trying to feed it to them. Like pretty much how any child would normally act, except they don't really get past that without an intervention. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
And I don't want to hug up your the conversation, but another thing that I've noticed is that with the food selections for my nephew, if it is something that he should not be eating or is not agreeable with him, as soon as he tastes it, you know, he get physically sick.
Mm.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah.
But we've had to go through this, and he's 20 something years now, you know, so we've gone through this for all those many years with him. And while I'm on, may I ask a question? I know sometimes people say that when kids get the shots, that this may cause them, I don't know if I'm wavering from the conversation or not, but
It's
have
fine.
you ever heard something like that?
Yeah, I think a lot of people believe that vaccinating your children leads to autism, and there really isn't any proof backing that. There really isn't any like solid, concrete cause for autism. It's very, again, it's one of autism. I feel like it's not paid very much attention to, and this is why it needs a lot more awareness so that people can actually figure out a cause. But people say it can be genetic. It can actually be due to the environment that you live in. I found in my research that certain areas that had like a lot of pesticides around there, children were more prone to have autism in those areas. So it varies, but I don't think people should not vaccinate their children, because there are a lot of vaccines that children do need. So I think it's just, I think it was just something that was spread, but I haven't seen any research that really backs that as being a cause for autism.
Oh, okay. So I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so in addition to like food fixations, would a child with autism maybe fixate on anything else that they maybe need instant gratification for at times?
Yeah, like they might be, they might like that specific kind of, like a specific toy or like a certain kind of song, or it really varies. It's very interesting because you don't really know why they fixate on why they do, except that it's really compulsive. They can't control it. Like this one kid, he would used to love like playing these songs in the classroom, and that would be like his favorite thing. And he could play those songs for like hours if somebody left him to it. And then there was this other kid who used to they have these like sensory toys that basically allow the kid to get sensory input that is more soothing to them. So this one child would like to focus on them. I think it has a lot to do with just what's stimulating to them and the kind of sensory input that they like. I think that's what I think about it. They can fixate on a number of things. If you give them something, or if they find something that they like and they want to play with it forever, they could do that if no one stopped them, I think. Yeah.
Nadine, I have a question. Back to the functioning thing, high functioning. So I guess, is it possible that a child could go for a very long time without being diagnosed as autistic because of the fact that they're high functioning?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens a lot more than people know. Some of these children, they don't really display the other characteristics, and I am pretty sure a lot of people get late diagnosis. And I mean, I've seen people and talked to people through some work that I've done who their children might be like 9 or 10 or even older, and they still, their parents are really like starting to realize the signs, and they're like, oh, maybe something is wrong. And then that it's not until then that they go and seek help for like a diagnosis, like an actual diagnosis. So it does happen that these children can unfortunately fall through the cracks and they're not really diagnosed.
Maybe into adulthood?
I'm sorry?
Maybe
Yes,
into adulthood?
it's very possible, yeah. Especially with like very mild forms of autism, like Asperger's. I'm pretty sure people can go all their lives without being diagnosed, I actually remember talking to a guy who was actually in the military, and he was quite like older. I think he had to be like 40, and he was just, thinking that, they told him that maybe he should get checked out because he probably does have some kind of form of autism. So I'm pretty sure a lot of people throughout their lives are just, figuring out that they might have autism, but they weren't sure what to call it before, or they might have been displaying the characteristics.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? No. Okay, well, thank you so much for all of your enthusiasm and all of your questions. That's all the time we have for tonight. I had a great time. Thank you so much. I'll see you guys soon.
Thank you.